"You're fired. Security, escort this old woman out of my hospital." The words echoed through the marble lobby like a death sentence. Margaret Chen stood frozen, her weathered hands still clutching the patient chart she'd been reviewing. 40 years of saving lives. 40 years of sleepless nights in war zones, disaster areas, and emergency rooms. All of it reduced to nothing by a man in a $15,000 suit who had never held a dying child in his arms. Marcus Hale didn't even look at her as he turned away, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. To him, she was just another expense to cut, another outdated piece of equipment to replace. Margaret walked out with her head high but her heart shattered. She had no idea that in exactly 17 hours this same man would be on his knees, begging her to come back, because his 12-year-old daughter would be dying, and Margaret Chen would be the only person on earth who could save her. Before we continue with this incredible story of karma, justice, and redemption, do me a favor. Drop a comment right now telling me if you've ever been underestimated because of your age or appearance. Hit that subscribe button, because you won't believe how this billionaire's arrogance comes back to destroy him. And smash that like button if you believe that respect should be earned, not bought. Now, let me tell you how it all began. Margaret Chen had seen death more times than most people see sunrises. She'd pulled shrapnel from soldiers in Afghanistan, while mortars exploded overhead. She'd delivered babies in earthquake rubble in Haiti with nothing but a flashlight and her bare hands. She'd held the hands of dying patients in Ebola outbreak zones while younger doctors refused to enter the room, too afraid to face what she confronted every single day. Her face was lined not with age, but with the weight of every life she'd fought to save. Each wrinkle told a story. The crease between her eyebrows came from countless nights squinting at patient charts under dim lights in makeshift hospitals. The lines around her eyes were from smiling at frightened children, convincing them everything would be okay, even when she wasn't sure it would be. The deepness around her mouth came from years of whispering prayers over patients she couldn't save, asking forgiveness for not being enough. At 62, she still worked 12-hour shifts without complaint. Her back ached from decades of bending over hospital beds. Her feet hurt from miles walked through corridors. Her hands bore the scars of accidental needle sticks and chemical burns. But those same hands never trembled when inserting an IV. Her diagnostic instincts were sharper than any machine. She could read a patient's body language and know they were declining before any monitors started beeping. But in the modern world of medicine, none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was speed, efficiency, youth, and above all, profitability. Margaret had watched the changes happen slowly over the years. Hospitals became corporations. Patients became customers. Healing became a business model with quarterly earnings reports. The young doctors fresh out of medical school were brilliant with technology, but they'd never learned to trust their instincts. They looked at screens instead of patients. They trusted algorithms over intuition, and when Margaret tried to teach them differently, they smiled politely and ignored her. After all, what could this old woman possibly know that their advanced systems didn't? Marcus Hale had made his billions in medical technology. His company, Hale Tech Industries, developed AI diagnostic systems that promised to revolutionize healthcare. Their flagship product, dying.And, could supposedly analyze symptoms, review medical histories, and recommend treatments faster and more accurately than any human doctor. The marketing was brilliant. The investors were thrilled. The stock price soared. When Marcus acquired Riverside Private Hospital 6 months ago for $300 million, it wasn't because he cared about healthcare. It was because he needed a showcase facility to demonstrate his technology. A real-world laboratory where dying.And could prove itself superior to human judgment. His first priority was modernization. Out with the old, in with the new. Every examination room got new computer terminals. Every doctor got tablets loaded with the AI system. Every diagnosis had to be logged, tracked, and compared against the AI's recommendations. And anyone who resisted the changes was shown the door. Margaret had been a problem from day one. She questioned the AI recommendations. When the system said a patient could be sent home, Margaret sometimes insisted they stay for observation. When the computer calculated that a certain treatment was most cost-effective, Margaret occasionally advocated for more expensive alternatives because her experience told her the cheaper option wouldn't work. She didn't do it to be difficult. She did it because she'd seen too many bodies buried under the weight of efficient but wrong decisions. The younger staff found her frustrating. Dr. James Chen, no relation, was a 32-year-old physician who'd graduated top of his class from Johns Hopkins. He'd published papers on machine learning and medicine. He believed deeply in the promise of AI, and he'd filed 3 formal complaints about Margaret overriding the system. "She's a liability," he told Marcus during a management meeting. "She undermines the technology in front of patients. She makes the staff question the AI's recommendations. If we're going to prove this system works, we can't have someone sabotaging it." Marcus had nodded. In his world, problems were simple. You identified inefficiencies and eliminated them. Margaret Chen was inefficient. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. A 54-year-old man named Robert Perkins came into the emergency room complaining of severe abdominal pain. The MediMind AI ran its analysis based on his symptoms, vital signs, and medical history. Its recommendation: acute gastritis, likely stress-related. Prescribe proton pump inhibitors and send home with instructions to follow up with his primary care physician. Dr. Chen agreed with the assessment. The numbers supported it. The algorithm had a 93% confidence rating, but Margaret, who'd been assigned to prep Mr. Perkins for discharge, noticed something the computer hadn't flagged: the way he winced when she pressed on his lower right abdomen, the slight yellowing in the whites of his eyes that the overhead lights made difficult to see, the way his pain seemed to come in waves rather than remaining constant. She'd seen this before, not in America, but in a field hospital in South Sudan, where diagnostic equipment consisted of her hands, her eyes, and 4 decades of pattern recognition. "Dr. Chen," she said quietly, "I think we should run additional tests before we send him home." The young doctor looked annoyed. "The AI has already made the diagnosis, Margaret. We've done the workup. It's gastritis." "I understand, but I'd like to request an ultrasound of his abdomen and additional liver function tests." "That's not indicated. It's not cost-effective. And frankly, it's exactly the kind of outdated, gut-feeling medicine that we're moving away from." Margaret stood her ground. "I've seen this presentation before. If I'm wrong, we've wasted an hour and some testing supplies. If I'm right, and we send him home, he'll be dead by tomorrow morning." Dr. Chen's face flushed. He called Marcus Hale directly. 20 minutes later, Marcus arrived at the ER. He listened to both sides for less than 3 minutes before making his decision. "Run the test she wants," he said. "But this is the last time, Margaret. If you're wrong, you're done." The ultrasound showed a rare intestinal blockage combined with early-stage liver inflammation that would have been fatal within hours. Mr. Perkins was rushed to emergency surgery. The surgical team found a twisted section of intestine that was minutes away from rupturing, which would have caused sepsis and almost certain death. Margaret had saved his life, but Marcus Hale saw it differently. She'd wasted resources, delayed other patients. Most importantly, she'd undermined the very technology he'd spent millions implementing. She'd made the AI look fallible in front of staff and patients. That couldn't stand. The next morning, Wednesday, Marcus called a staff meeting in the main lobby. He wanted everyone present: doctors, nurses, administrators, even maintenance staff. He wanted witnesses. Margaret arrived thinking it was a routine policy update. She stood in the back, tired from a double shift but attentive. Marcus took the podium and spoke for 10 minutes about innovation, efficiency, and the future of medicine. Then he pointed directly at Margaret. "Yesterday, one of our nurses decided that her personal judgment was more important than our AI diagnostic system. She wasted valuable resources on unnecessary tests. She delayed care for other patients. She represents exactly the kind of backwards thinking that has no place in modern medicine." Margaret felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her face burned with humiliation. "Margaret Chen, you're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You have 10 minutes to collect your personal belongings." The room was silent. No one defended her. The younger staff looked away. The doctors who'd worked with her for years studied their shoes. Even Mr. Perkins, the patient she'd saved just hours earlier, was still in recovery and had no idea she was being destroyed for saving his life. Margaret didn't argue, didn't beg. She'd learned long ago that dignity was something no one could take from you unless you gave it away. She walked to her locker, removed her few personal items, placed her badge on the reception desk, and walked out into the afternoon sun. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't tear up. Not yet. Her daughter Sarah picked her up an hour later and found her sitting on a bench 3 blocks from the hospital, staring at nothing. "Mom?" Sarah sat beside her, worried. "What happened?" Margaret took a long breath. I got fired for saving a man's life. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. That's insane. We'll sue. No. Margaret shook her head slowly. I'm too old for this fight anymore. Maybe he's right. Maybe the world doesn't need nurses like me. Maybe I'm just in the way of progress. Mom, don't say that. You're the best nurse I've ever known. Margaret smiled sadly. The world will always need nurses like me, sweetheart. The question is whether the world will value us before it's too late. Some people only learn lessons when they're drowning, and by then they've usually taken everyone else down with them. She had no idea how prophetic those words would be. That night, Margaret sat in her small two-bedroom apartment in Queens, drinking tea and staring at old photographs. Her late husband, Thomas, who died 8 years ago from pancreatic cancer, her daughter Sarah and granddaughter Lily. Photos from her time in Doctors Without Borders, covered in dust and exhaustion, but smiling because they'd just saved a village from a cholera outbreak. She dedicated her entire life to healing, and in one morning a billionaire who'd never touched a patient had declared her worthless. Margaret went to bed wondering if she'd ever wear scrubs again. Marcus Hale lived in a world where problems were solved with money and power. His penthouse occupied the entire 47th floor of a luxury building in Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park. His cars cost more than most people's houses. His watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe, could fund a small hospital in a developing country for a year. But all the money in the world couldn't buy him the one thing he'd sacrificed everything for: time with his daughter. Emma Hale was 12 years old and barely knew her father. She had his dark hair and sharp intelligence, but none of his coldness. Where Marcus saw the world as a series of transactions and competitions, Emma saw beauty, possibility, and connection. After the divorce 3 years ago, Emma split time between her mother Catherine's estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, and Marcus's penthouse. But even when she was with him, he wasn't really there. He was always on his phone, in video conferences, checking stock prices, closing deals, sending emails at midnight about quarterly projections. Emma had learned to live in silence around her father. She read books about marine biology, did her homework without asking for help, and counted the days until she could go back to her mother's house, where at least the staff remembered her favorite foods and asked about her day. Marcus told himself he was building a legacy for Emma, that she'd thank him someday when she inherited his empire, that providing her with the best schools, the finest clothes, and unlimited opportunities was what fatherhood meant. He'd never asked her what she actually wanted. If he had, he would have learned that Emma's favorite color was purple, not the corporate blue he'd decorated her room with, that she was terrified of thunderstorms and still slept with a nightlight, that she dreamed of studying oceanography, not business administration, that she would have traded the penthouse, the private school, and the trust fund for one dinner, where her father asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. This weekend was supposed to be special. Marcus had actually cleared his schedule for Emma's 12th birthday party. It was the first time in 3 years he'd blocked out an entire Saturday for his daughter. Of course, he'd delegated the actual planning to his assistant. David Reeves had hired the best party planner in Manhattan. 50 kids from Emma's private school were invited. There would be a celebrity DJ who'd performed at the Grammys, catering from Le Bernardin, a custom cake from Dominique Ansel, party favors that cost $200 each. Everything money could buy. Nothing that required Marcus to actually know his daughter. Emma got ready for her party with help from the housekeeper, Maria. She wore a dress her mother had sent from Connecticut, pale purple with silver threads that caught the light. Marcus came out of his home office at 6 p.m., still on his phone, and barely glanced at her. "You look nice," he said distractedly. "David said the guests should start arriving in 30 minutes. I have to take this call, but I'll be out soon." Emma smiled, the polite, distant smile she'd perfected over the years. "Thanks, Dad." By 7 p.m., the penthouse was full of kids Emma barely knew. Her mother had insisted she invite the whole class to avoid anyone feeling excluded, but Emma was only close friends with maybe 3 of them. The rest were the children of New York's elite, raised on the same diet of privilege and emotional distance that Emma knew too well. The DJ played music too loud for conversation. The caterers served food too sophisticated for 12-year-olds. The party planner ensured everything ran on schedule with military precision. Marcus stood near the windows, drink in hand, talking to other parents about market trends and acquisition strategies. He'd made an appearance. That counted as parenting, didn't it? Emma stood near the elaborate chocolate fountain with her best friend Sophie, trying to look like she was having fun. Inside, she felt hollow. Another birthday where her father was physically present but emotionally absent. Another year older. Another year of realizing that no amount of money could fill the emptiness of not being truly seen. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked quietly, noticing Emma's forced smile. "Yeah," Emma lied. "Just tired." That's when it happened. Emma was laughing at something Sophie said, reaching for a strawberry to dip in the chocolate fountain, when the world suddenly tilted sideways. The room began to spin. Her vision blurred at the edges like looking through a tunnel that was rapidly closing. "Emma!" Sophie's voice sounded distant, muffled. Emma tried to respond, but her tongue felt thick and useless in her mouth. Her legs buckled. The strawberry fell from her fingers and bounced across the marble floor. She collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. The screaming started immediately. Kids scattered backward, terrified. Some pulled out their phones. The DJ cut the music mid-song, leaving a terrible silence broken only by panicked voices. Marcus pushed through the crowd of frozen party guests and dropped to his knees beside his daughter. Emma's body was rigid, shaking with violent convulsions. Her eyes had rolled back, showing only whites. Foam gathered at the corners of her mouth. Her fingernails were turning blue. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Hale felt pure, overwhelming terror. All his power, all his control, all his certainty evaporated in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Somebody call 911, a parent shouted. "No," Marcus barked, his voice cracking. "Call my hospital. Get the best doctors to the penthouse now. I want a full medical team here in 10 minutes. Move!" David Reeves was already on the phone, his hands shaking as he made the calls. Maria had grabbed blankets and was trying to keep Emma from hurting herself during the seizure. Other parents were ushering their terrified children toward the elevator. The party was over. The only thing that mattered now was whether Emma would survive it. Within 20 minutes, a team of physicians from Riverside Private Hospital arrived with portable equipment. They'd brought a stretcher, monitors, emergency medications. Dr. James Chen led the team, the same young doctor who'd argued with Margaret just 2 days earlier. They stabilized Emma enough to transport her, getting the seizure under control with anticonvulsants and securing her airway. Marcus rode in the ambulance, holding his daughter's small, cold hand for the first time in months, maybe years. He couldn't remember the last time he'd actually held her hand. "Stay with me, Emma," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please stay with me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But Emma couldn't hear him. She was somewhere far away, her body fighting a battle that no one yet understood. At Riverside Private Hospital, the same gleaming facility where Margaret Chen had been fired less than 24 hours earlier, Emma was rushed into the ICU. Marcus paced the hallway like a caged animal while doctors ran test after test. CT scan of her brain, MRI, comprehensive blood work, toxicology screens, lumbar puncture, chest x-rays. Everything came back with fragments of information but no clear answers. "Her brain activity is erratic," Dr. Chen explained, standing in front of Marcus with a tablet showing Emma's test results. "There's inflammation, possibly an infection, but we can't identify the specific pathogen. It's not showing up as bacterial or viral through standard tests." "Then run non-standard tests," Marcus roared, his composure completely shattered. "I don't care what it costs. Fly in specialists from anywhere in the world. Get people on the phone from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, Massachusetts General. Someone has to know what this is." But as the hours dragged on and the night deepened into early morning, Emma's condition worsened rather than improved. The fever climbed to dangerous levels despite aggressive cooling measures. The seizures became more frequent, each one lasting longer than the last. Her small body was fighting an invisible enemy, and the army of expensive doctors surrounding her were firing blind into the dark. Marcus stood at the window of Emma's ICU room, watching machines breathe for his daughter. The ventilator pushed air into her lungs with mechanical precision. Monitors tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every brainwave. IV lines ran into both arms, pumping fluids and medications into her system, but none of it was working. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus felt completely powerless. All his wealth, all his connections, all his brilliant technology meant absolutely nothing. He couldn't negotiate with death. He couldn't buy his daughter's health. He couldn't acquire a cure like he'd acquired companies. He was just a terrified father watching his only child die, and he had no idea how to stop it. Dr. Chen approached with yet another update, his face grim. "Mr. Hale, We've consulted with infectious disease specialists at 3 major hospitals. No one has seen this exact combination of symptoms. We're treating it as aggressively as we can, but without a definitive diagnosis." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Marcus turned away from the window, his eyes hollow. There has to be something. Someone. Anyone who's seen this before. A young nurse named Bethany, who'd been working the shift since Emma arrived, hesitated near the door. She'd been thinking about something for hours, but had been too afraid to speak up. The memory of Margaret Chen's public humiliation was still fresh in everyone's mind. But looking at Emma, looking at this dying child, Bethany decided that some things were more important than fear. "Mr. Hale," she said quietly, "I'm sorry to bother you, but there's one more possibility." Marcus turned, desperate hope flashing across his face. "What? Tell me. Anything." Bethany swallowed hard. "There was a nurse who used to work here. She had experience with rare tropical diseases, parasitic infections, things we almost never see in the United States. She worked in field hospitals, war zones, disaster areas, places where they didn't have fancy diagnostic equipment, so they had to rely on clinical observation and pattern recognition. I've seen her diagnose things that stumped entire teams of specialists, things that didn't show up on any of our standard tests." Marcus felt a cold dread creeping up his spine, spreading through his chest like ice water. "What was her name?" Bethany met his eyes. "Margaret Chen." She had this instinct for seeing patterns that didn't make sense to anyone else. She saved a patient just 2 days ago with exactly this kind of diagnostic mystery. The words hung in the air like an accusation. The old nurse, the one he'd called outdated, the one he'd humiliated in front of the entire staff, the one he'd fired for being exactly what his daughter needed right now. Marcus closed his eyes, and in that moment, every cruel word he'd spoken, every dismissive gesture, every arrogant assumption came crashing back on him with the weight of a collapsing building. Pride and panic warred inside him. His ego screamed at him to find another solution, any other solution. But his heart, that part of him he'd silenced for decades in pursuit of success, whispered a different truth. Emma was dying. His pride didn't matter. His reputation didn't matter. Nothing mattered except saving his daughter. He turned back to the window, looking at Emma's pale face, her chest rising and falling only because a machine forced it to. "Find her," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Find Margaret Chen. Now." At 1:47 a.m., Margaret's phone rang in the darkness of her bedroom. She was awake, sitting in her small kitchen, unable to sleep. The humiliation of being fired still burned, but more than that, she worried about her patients. Mr. Perkins, recovering from surgery, Mrs. Davidson with her heart condition, young Timothy with his mysterious rash that 3 doctors had misdiagnosed before Margaret figured it out. Who would advocate for them now? Who would question the AI when it was wrong? Who would trust their instincts over algorithms? She didn't recognize the phone number but answered anyway. Years of being on call, of middle-of-the-night emergencies, had trained her to always pick up. Someone might need help. "Ms. Chen, this is David Reeves, Mr. Hale's executive assistant." The man's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Mr. Hale needs you at Riverside Hospital immediately. It's an emergency." Margaret's first instinct was to hang up, to let Marcus Hale feel what it was like to be helpless and desperate and dismissed, to let him understand that some things can't be bought or bullied into existence. But something in David's voice stopped her. There was genuine fear there, not the corporate panic of a missed deadline or a stock price drop, but the primal terror of death. The sound of someone watching a life slip away. "What's the emergency?" she asked calmly, already moving toward her closet to get dressed. His daughter, Emma. She collapsed at her birthday party. "She's in the ICU, and none of our doctors can figure out what's wrong with her. She's getting worse. Please, Ms. Chen. She's 12 years old. Whatever happened between you and Mr. Hale, this little girl doesn't deserve to die because of it. He'll pay whatever you want. Name your price." Margaret closed her eyes. She thought about hanging up, walking away, letting Marcus Hale face the consequences of his cruelty, teaching him a lesson he'd never forget. But then she thought about Emma, 12-year-old girl she'd never met, child who had nothing to do with her father's arrogance, a daughter who probably barely knew the man who'd destroyed Margaret's dignity, who was likely as much a victim of his ambition as anyone else. Margaret had spent 40 years saving lives. She'd taken an oath long ago to do no harm, to help whenever she could, regardless of who asked or what they'd done to her. She could hate Marcus Hale, but she couldn't let that hatred kill an innocent child. "Tell Mr. Hale I'm not coming for him," Margaret said firmly, pulling on her clothes with one hand while balancing the phone with the other. "I'm not coming for money. I'm not coming because he asked. If I come, it's for Emma. Only for Emma. Is that absolutely clear?" "Yes, ma'am, completely clear." David's relief was audible. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Have them prepare Emma's complete medical history, every test result, every medication she's received. I want the names of everywhere she's traveled in the last 6 months. I want to know everything she ate in the last 72 hours. And I want everyone to stay out of my way when I get there. Done. All of it. I'll have everything ready." Margaret hung up and grabbed her old field medical bag, the worn leather satchel that had traveled with her through Afghanistan, Haiti, South Sudan, and a dozen other places where medicine was practiced with hands and hearts rather than computers and insurance forms. She kept it in the back of her closet, a relic from a different life, a reminder of who she used to be before hospitals became corporations. Tonight, she'd need everything that bag represented. Sarah, who'd been sleeping in the guest room, appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Mom, where are you going?" "The hospital. Emergency. But you got fired." "I know." Margaret pulled on her jacket. "But there's a little girl dying, and apparently I'm the only one who might be able to save her." "Whose daughter?" Margaret paused, met her daughter's eyes. "Marcus Hale's." Sarah's expression shifted through shock, anger, and finally something like sad understanding. "Mom, you don't have to do this after what he did to you." "I know I don't have to, but I'm going to anyway, because that's who I am. That's who I've always been." Margaret kissed her daughter's forehead. "Go back to sleep. I'll call you later." As the cab drove through the empty streets of New York at 2 in the morning, Margaret prayed that whatever was killing Emma Hale was something she'd seen before. Because if it wasn't, if this was truly beyond her experience, that little girl didn't have much time left. And despite everything Marcus Hale had done to her, Margaret discovered she didn't want to watch another father bury his child. She'd seen that too many times already. It never got easier. When Margaret walked into Riverside Hospital at 2:20 a.m., the place was in controlled chaos. The night shift staff who'd witnessed her humiliation just 2 days earlier stared in shock. Some looked away in guilt. Others nodded respectfully. A few whispered to each other, wondering what could possibly bring her back. Marcus Hale stood in the ICU corridor, still wearing his party clothes, though his expensive shirt was now wrinkled and stained with coffee. His tie hung loose around his neck. His face was pale with exhaustion and fear, the carefully maintained mask of confidence completely shattered. When their eyes met across the corridor, time seemed to stop. Margaret saw the man who'd destroyed her dignity, who'd made her question her worth, who'd thrown away 40 years of service like garbage. She saw arrogance and cruelty, and the kind of pride that breaks everything it touches. Marcus saw the woman who held his daughter's life in her weathered hands. He saw his last hope. He saw someone he'd destroyed who had every reason to let him suffer. And he saw, perhaps for the first time, the tremendous courage it took to walk back into a place that had treated you with such contempt. Neither spoke for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Then Margaret simply walked past him without a word and straight into Emma's room. She didn't acknowledge his presence, didn't wait for permission, didn't ask for the update he was preparing to give. She dismissed the hovering doctors with a single gesture and approached the bed alone. For 5 full minutes, Margaret simply observed. She didn't touch any equipment, didn't read any charts. She just watched Emma with the kind of focused attention that decades of experience had taught her. The breathing pattern, even assisted by the ventilator, the slight tremor in the fingers, the color of the skin under the harsh ICU lights, the way Emma's eyes moved beneath closed lids, the tension in her jaw, the position of her hands. Every detail told a story. Every symptom was a word in a language Margaret had spent a lifetime learning to read. Then she did something that made the watching doctors shift uncomfortably. She leaned close and smelled Emma's breath, even though the ventilator made it difficult. She examined the girl's fingernails closely, looking at the beds and the cuticles. She pressed gently on specific points of Emma's abdomen, watching for reflexive responses even in her unconscious state. She looked at the soles of Emma's feet, pulled down her lower eyelids to check the color of her membranes, examined the inside of her mouth. It was old-fashioned medicine, the kind that relied on human senses and hard-won experience, the kind that AI couldn't replicate because it required not just data, but wisdom. When did she return from Southeast Asia? Margaret asked suddenly, still not looking at anyone else in the room. The silence was deafening. Dr. Chen stepped forward. How did you know she was in Southeast Asia? Margaret finally turned to face them. The rash pattern on her ankles, barely visible but there if you know what to look for. The specific type of respiratory distress that's not responding to standard treatments. The neurological symptoms combined with the fever pattern. When was she there? Marcus stepped into the room, his voice hoarse. She was with her mother in Thailand 2 weeks ago. How is that relevant? Margaret's expression remained calm, but inside, pieces were clicking together with terrifying clarity. Like a puzzle she'd seen before, in another place, another time, with stakes just as high. Did she swim in any fresh water? Lakes, rivers, not hotel pools, but natural water? Marcus's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone, frantically scrolling through Emma's Instagram account. David appeared at his shoulder, helping him search. Yes, David said, his voice tight. There are photos of her swimming in a river near Chiang Mai. She posted them 2 weeks ago. She said the water was beautiful. Margaret nodded slowly, her face grave. Get me doxycycline IV, highest therapeutic dose. I need IV fluids with specific electrolyte ratios I'm about to dictate. Prepare for possible respiratory support escalation, and get respiratory therapy on standby. Monitor her kidney and liver function every 2 hours, and bring me her complete travel history, including everywhere she ate, everywhere she stayed, everyone she was in contact with. Dr. Chen stepped forward, his young face skeptical. With respect, Ms. Chen, what's your diagnosis? We need to understand the clinical reasoning before we start treatment. Margaret met his eyes steadily. She has leptospirosis complicated by Weil's disease. It's a bacterial infection from contaminated water, usually from animal urine. The bacteria enter through small cuts or mucous membranes. In tropical areas with poor sanitation, freshwater swimming is a high-risk activity. The incubation period matches her timeline perfectly. That's an extremely rare diagnosis, Dr. Chen objected. Our AI system didn't flag any. Your AI system, Margaret interrupted quietly but firmly, was designed by people who've never worked in rural field hospitals in tropical regions. It doesn't know what to look for because the programmers have never seen it. The symptom presentation is subtle and easy to miss if you don't know the pattern. I do. I've seen this exact clinical picture 17 times across 3 continents. 12 of those patients died because we diagnosed it too late. Emma won't be the 13th if you start treatment now. She turned back to Marcus, and her voice softened slightly. The next 72 hours are critical. If the bacteria have already caused significant organ damage, we'll know soon. The kidneys and liver are most at risk, but if we've caught it early enough, if her immune system is strong and we're aggressive with treatment, she'll recover fully. Marcus's voice cracked with desperation and hope. And if you're wrong, then you can fire me again, Margaret said without emotion. But I'm not wrong, Mr. Hale. I've been doing this too long to be wrong about this. Now stop talking and let me work. The room erupted into controlled motion. Nurses brought medications. Respiratory therapists checked equipment. Lab technicians prepared for serial blood draws. And Margaret Chen, the old nurse who'd been deemed obsolete and incompetent just 2 days earlier, took command of the ICU with the quiet authority of someone who'd stared down death 1,000 times and won. For the next 14 hours, Margaret Chen became an unstoppable force of nature. She adjusted medications by the minute, watching Emma's responses with an intensity that never wavered. She caught complications before the monitors did, seeing changes in skin color or breathing patterns that the machines hadn't flagged yet. She knew when to push treatment aggressively and when to pull back and let Emma's body recover. The younger doctors watched in awe as this woman they'd been taught to see as obsolete practiced medicine like a master musician playing an instrument she'd spent a lifetime perfecting. Every movement was precise. Every decision was confident. Every instinct was right. She never left Emma's side except for 2 brief trips to the bathroom. She didn't eat, barely drank water. Her entire world narrowed to the young girl fighting for her life in that bed. Marcus never left the corridor. He watched through the glass as Margaret worked hour after hour, her weathered face calm and focused, even as everyone around her grew increasingly exhausted. He saw her adjust an IV line at 3 a.m. because the flow rate was slightly off. He saw her catch a dangerous drop in Emma's blood pressure at 6 a.m. before any alarm sounded. He saw her whisper encouragement to Emma's unconscious form, treating her with a tenderness that made his chest ache. This was what healing looked like when you cared more about the life than the profit margin. At hour 9, when Emma's fever finally broke, Marcus saw Margaret close her eyes briefly and whisper something that looked like a prayer of thanks. Her shoulders sagged infinitesimally, the first sign of fatigue she'd shown. At hour 12, Emma opened her eyes for the first time, confused, weak, disoriented, but alive and aware. Margaret was there immediately, her hand gentle on Emma's forehead. "Hello, sweetheart," Margaret said softly. "You're in the hospital. You've been very sick, but you're going to be okay now. Can you hear me?" Emma's eyes struggled to focus. Her throat was raw from the ventilator tube that had been removed an hour earlier. She managed a tiny nod. "Good girl. Don't try to talk yet. Just rest. Your father is right outside. He's been here the whole time. You're safe now." A single tear rolled down Emma's cheek. Whether from relief, confusion, or the lingering effects of her ordeal, no one could say. But Margaret wiped it away gently and stayed beside her until Emma drifted back into a more natural, healing sleep. At hour 14, Margaret finally allowed herself to step out of the room. Her back screamed in protest. Her feet throbbed. Her eyes burned with exhaustion. But Emma was stable. The crisis had passed. The girl would live. She found Marcus sitting on the floor outside, his head in his hands, still wearing the same wrinkled party clothes from what felt like a lifetime ago. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a single night. He looked up when her shadow fell across him, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Then, without a word, this man who'd built an empire through ruthlessness and pride, who'd crushed competitors and dismissed anyone who challenged him, who'd never apologized for anything in his adult life, did something that shocked everyone watching. Marcus Hale got on his knees. Not metaphorically, actually on his knees on the hospital floor. This billionaire in his $1,000 shoes, kneeling in front of the nurse he'd destroyed. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and tears ran down his face for the first time since he was a child. "I'm so sorry. You saved her. You saved my daughter when I... He couldn't finish. The weight of his cruelty, his arrogance, his blindness crashed over him all at once. Every dismissive word, every arrogant assumption, every time he'd valued profit over people, efficiency over empathy, youth over wisdom. It all came due in that moment, kneeling before a woman who had every reason to walk away and let his daughter die. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Marcus continued, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve your help. I don't deserve anything from you. But you came anyway. You saved her anyway. Why? After what I did to you, why would you save her?" Margaret stood silently for a long moment, looking down at this broken man. She could have savored his suffering, could have twisted the knife of his guilt, could have made him grovel and beg and feel a fraction of the humiliation she'd endured. But that wasn't who Margaret Chen was. That had never been who she was. "I didn't save her for you, Mr. Hale," she said quietly, her voice firm but not cruel. "I saved her because that's what nurses do. We don't care if you're rich or poor, kind or cruel, grateful or arrogant. We care because life has value, every life, even when people like you can't see it, even when we get nothing in return but disrespect and dismissal." He paused, looking at the ICU window where Emma slept peacefully, finally out of danger. "I saved her because she's 12 years old, and she deserves a chance to grow up. Because she didn't choose to have a father who measures worth in dollars and efficiency ratings. Because somewhere under all that pride and ambition, I have to believe there's still a human being who can learn to be better." Marcus looked up at her, his face streaked with tears. "Please, tell me how to make this right. I'll pay anything. I'll donate to any cause. I don't want your money," Margaret interrupted, her voice cutting through his desperate offers. "Money is easy for you. It costs you nothing to write a check. What I want is harder." She stepped closer, and Marcus could see the steel in her eyes. The strength forged through decades of impossible situations. The moral clarity that came from saving lives when no one was watching, when there was no profit in it, when the only reward was knowing you'd done the right thing. "I want you to create a fund for veteran nurses," Margaret said. "The ones hospitals throw away because they're not young and fast anymore. The ones who carry 40 years of knowledge that no AI can replicate, no algorithm can match. The ones who trust their instincts because those instincts have been proven right 1,000 times. Give them the dignity and respect they've earned. Give them positions where they can teach the next generation what computers can't. Make sure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else." Marcus nodded immediately, desperately. "Done. I'll start it tomorrow. 10 million to begin with. 20, 50, whatever it takes. And one more thing," Margaret added, her voice softening slightly. "That little girl in there almost died not from the infection, but from not having a father who truly knew her. Do you know what she said when she was drifting in and out of consciousness? When she thought she might be dying?" Marcus shook his head, fear and guilt written across his face. "She said, 'Tell my dad my favorite color is purple. I don't think he knows.' She said, 'Tell him I'm scared of thunderstorms and I wish he'd checked on me during them.' She said, 'Tell him I want to study the ocean, not business. I hope he won't be too disappointed.'" Each sentence hit Marcus like a physical blow. His daughter's voice, her fears, her dreams, all things he'd never taken the time to learn. A 12-year-old girl, possibly dying, and her biggest worry was that she'd disappointed a father who barely knew she existed. Margaret's voice held no judgment, only profound sadness. "You've been so busy building an empire that you forgot to build a relationship with the one person who actually matters." Marcus's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Learn who your daughter is, Mr. Hale," Margaret said gently, "because all the money in the world means nothing if you're too busy making it to know the person you're making it for. All the technology in the world is worthless if you're too focused on innovation to notice the human beings right in front of you. Emma doesn't need a billionaire father. She needs a dad who shows up, who listens, who cares enough to remember her favorite color." She turned to leave, exhausted beyond measure, ready to finally go home and sleep. But Marcus called out, his voice desperate. "Margaret, please, will you come back?" She paused but didn't turn around. "Not as a staff nurse," Marcus continued quickly. "As director of nursing education, help me rebuild this place the right way. Teach these young doctors what you know. Make sure your experience, your wisdom isn't lost. Please, I'll give you complete authority. Whatever you need, whatever you want to change, I'll support it all." Margaret stood still for a long moment, considering. She thought about retirement, about quiet days with her granddaughter Lily, about never dealing with hospital politics again, about never having to prove her worth to people young enough to be her children. But then she thought about all the Margaret Chens out there, all the experienced nurses being pushed aside, all the patients who would suffer because wisdom was being replaced by algorithms, all the young doctors who desperately needed to learn that medicine was both science and art, data and intuition, technology and humanity. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "But first I'm going home to sleep for 12 hours, then we'll talk. And Mr. Hale, if I come back, things are going to change. Really change. Not just words and policies, but culture, the way you value people, the way you practice medicine, all of it. Are you prepared for that?" Marcus stood up from the floor, wiping his eyes. "Yes, anything. I'll sign whatever you want. You have my word." Margaret almost smiled. "Your word? From a man who fired me in front of the entire hospital 2 days ago. You'll understand if I require more than that. Then we'll put it in writing. An ironclad contract. Whatever makes you trust this." Margaret finally turned to look at him. "Mr. Hale, trust isn't signed, it's earned. Let's see if you mean what you say when you're not terrified for your daughter's life. Check on Emma every hour. Talk to her when she wakes up. Learn her favorite things. Be her father, not her ATM. Do that first. Then we'll discuss the rest." With that, Margaret Chen walked out of Riverside Hospital for the second time in 3 days. But this time she walked out with her head high and her dignity intact. This time everyone who saw her pass knew they were watching someone extraordinary. The next 72 hours were critical, just as Margaret had warned. Emma battled through kidney stress and liver inflammation, her young body fighting to clear the bacterial infection from her system. But Margaret's early diagnosis and aggressive treatment had worked. Each day, Emma grew stronger. The fever stayed down. The seizures didn't return. The organs began to heal. Marcus never left the hospital. He slept in a chair by Emma's bed. He was there when she woke up confused and scared. He held her hand when the nightmares came. He talked to her, really talked to her, for the first time in years. "Dad?" Emma whispered on the second day, still weak, but more alert. "Why are you still here? Don't you have work?" Marcus felt his heart break a little more. His daughter was surprised he'd stayed, surprised that she mattered more than a meeting or a deal. "Work can wait." he said softly, squeezing her hand. You're more important than any business. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure that out. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? And Emma? I learned some things about you. Your favorite color is purple. You want to study marine biology. You're afraid of thunderstorms. He smiled sadly. I should have known all of that already. I'm sorry I didn't, but I'm going to do better. I promise. Emma squeezed his hand weakly. Who told you all that? The nurse who saved your life, Ms. Chen. You talked to her when you were very sick. I remember her voice, Emma said quietly. She was kind. She told me I was going to be okay, and I believed her. She was right. You are going to be okay. Marcus brushed hair from his daughter's forehead. And when you're better, we're going to start over. You and me. I'm going to learn everything about you. We're going to have dinner together every night. We're going to talk about the ocean and marine biology. We're going to do whatever you want to do, not what I think you should do. Does that sound good? Emma nodded, a real smile crossing her face for the first time. Yeah, Dad, that sounds really good. Over those 3 days, Marcus also had long conversations with Margaret, who returned each morning to check on Emma's progress, even though she wasn't technically employed by the hospital. They talked about medicine, about values, about what it meant to heal rather than just treat. You built a hospital that runs like a factory, Margaret told him bluntly on day 3. Efficient, profitable, fast. But medicine isn't manufacturing. Human beings aren't products. Healing takes time, takes intuition. It takes experience that can't be programmed into a computer. Marcus listened, really listened, in a way he never had before. Your AI is a tool, Margaret continued. A valuable tool when used correctly, but it's not a replacement for human judgment. It's a supplement. The best medicine happens when technology and experience work together, not when one tries to eliminate the other. I understand that now, Marcus said quietly. I was wrong about so much. Margaret studied him carefully. Were you wrong, or are you just scared and desperate right now? That's the real question, Mr. Hale. It's easy to have an epiphany during a crisis. The hard part is holding on to it when things return to normal, when the fear fades, when you're back in your penthouse making deals and checking stock prices. Marcus met her eyes steadily. I won't forget this. I can't forget this. Every time I look at Emma, I'll remember that she's only alive because of something I almost destroyed, because of someone I treated as worthless. That's not a lesson you forget. We'll see, Margaret said, neither believing nor disbelieving. Only time would tell if Marcus Hale's transformation was real or temporary. On day 4, Emma was moved out of the ICU. On day 7, she was discharged with strict instructions for follow-up care. Marcus took her not to his penthouse, but to his ex-wife's house in Connecticut, because Emma asked if she could go there and he'd promised to listen to what she wanted. Before they left, Emma insisted on thanking Margaret personally. The 12-year-old, still weak but recovering, hugged the nurse who'd saved her life. Thank you for not giving up on me, Emma whispered. Margaret hugged her back gently. Sweetheart, I would never give up on you. Never. You take care of yourself and come visit me sometime. I want to hear all about your marine biology dreams. I will. I promise. After they left, David Reeves approached Margaret with an envelope. Inside was a contract offering her the position of Director of Nursing Education at Riverside Hospital, with a salary triple what she'd been making, complete autonomy, and a guaranteed 5-year term with clauses that protected her from arbitrary termination. There was also a personal note from Marcus. Margaret, I meant everything I said. Please help me fix what I broke, not just in this hospital, but in how we value the people who dedicate their lives to healing. You were right about everything. I was wrong about everything. Let me prove I can learn. Marcus Hale. Margaret read the contract carefully. She had her daughter Sarah, who was a lawyer, review every clause. She took a full week to consider it. In the end, she decided to say yes. Not because she trusted Marcus completely, but because she trusted herself. Because she knew there were young nurses and doctors who needed someone to show them that medicine was more than protocols and algorithms. Because there were veteran nurses out there who needed an advocate, a voice, someone to prove they still mattered. And because, despite everything, she still believed people could change. 6 months later, Riverside Hospital looked the same on the outside. But inside, everything had transformed. The AI systems were still there, but now they worked alongside human intuition instead of trying to replace it. Veteran nurses led training programs, teaching young doctors the subtle signs that computers couldn't detect. Experience and innovation collaborated instead of competing. Margaret had created a fellowship program for nurses over 50, bringing in experts from around the world to share their knowledge. She'd implemented mentorship requirements where every new physician spent 6 months shadowing an experienced nurse before being allowed to practice independently. The changes were controversial at first. Some young doctors resented being taught by nurses. Some administrators worried about efficiency metrics. But then something remarkable happened. Patient outcomes improved dramatically. Diagnostic accuracy increased. Medical errors decreased. Patient satisfaction scores soared. Even the mortality rate dropped by 18% in 6 months. The data proved what Margaret had known all along. Wisdom and technology together were stronger than either alone. Marcus kept his promises too. The Hale Foundation for Nursing Excellence launched with $50 million, offering grants, scholarships, and retirement supplements for veteran nurses. Hospitals across the country began reaching out, wanting to replicate Riverside's model. And Marcus showed up for Emma. Every single day. He left work at 6 p.m. without exception. They had dinner together, talking about her day, her friends, her dreams. He learned that she liked reading fantasy novels, hated math homework, wanted to visit the Great Barrier Reef, and hoped to work with sea turtles someday. He attended her school plays, he helped with science projects. He checked on her during thunderstorms, sitting with her until the fear passed. He became, slowly but steadily, an actual father. Every Saturday morning, Emma came to the hospital to volunteer in the nursing education wing. She helped Margaret organize the library, filed papers, and listened to the veteran nurses tell stories about their careers. She was fascinated by medicine, but more than that, she was learning about service, compassion, and the quiet heroism of people who dedicate their lives to helping others. Margaret and Emma formed a bond that transcended the crisis that brought them together. Emma saw in Margaret the grandmother she'd lost years ago. Margaret saw in Emma the hope that the next generation might value different things than power and profit. On the 6-month anniversary of the day Emma almost died, Marcus stood in the hospital lobby where he'd once fired Margaret Chen. Now, a bronze plaque hung on the wall, unveiled in a ceremony attended by staff, patients, and press. The Margaret Chen Center for Nursing Excellence. In recognition of 40 years of service, wisdom, and the courage to stand for what is right when everyone else stands aside. Experience is not old-fashioned. It is timeless. Margaret herself stood beside Marcus at the unveiling, deeply uncomfortable with the attention. She'd never wanted recognition. She'd only wanted to do her job with dignity. Emma held her hand on the other side, beaming with pride. "You know," Marcus said quietly as the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, "I spent my whole life believing that success meant always moving forward, always upgrading, always replacing the old with the new. I built an empire on that philosophy. I made billions." He paused, looking at the plaque with his daughter's savior's name on it. "I almost lost everything because I couldn't see that some things don't become obsolete. Some things become invaluable. Some wisdom can't be coded. Some experience can't be replicated. And some people carry knowledge so profound that dismissing them isn't just cruel, it's catastrophically stupid." Margaret smiled slightly. "Most people learn that lesson too late, if they learn it at all. You're one of the lucky ones, Mr. Hale. You learned it while you still had time to change." "I'm lucky you came back," Marcus said. "After what I did, you had every reason to walk away and never look back." "I didn't come back for you," Margaret reminded him gently. "I came back for Emma, and for every nurse who's been made to feel worthless because they've been doing this too long, and for every patient who deserves to be treated by someone who sees them as a human being, not a data point." Emma looked up at both of them. "Ms. Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. When my dad fired you, were you angry at him?" Margaret considered the question carefully, aware that both Emma and Marcus were watching her intently, waiting for her answer. "I was hurt," she said honestly. "Deeply hurt. When you dedicate your life to something and someone tells you that dedication is worthless, it cuts in ways that are hard to explain. But anger?" She shook her head slowly. "Anger wastes energy that could be used to heal. I learned a long time ago that the best response to cruelty isn't revenge. It's to keep being kind anyway, to keep showing up, to keep doing the right thing even when people treat you wrongly. Because eventually, life has a way of teaching the lessons we all need to learn. Marcus met her eyes, and in that moment, an understanding passed between them. Forgiveness didn't erase what had happened. It didn't make the humiliation disappear, or pretend the harm hadn't been real, but it made space for something better to grow in its place. It made room for transformation. "Come on," Margaret said to Emma, breaking the heavy moment with gentle pragmatism. "I promise to teach you how to properly start an IV line today, on the practice arms. Your dad can come watch if he wants to actually learn something useful for once." Emma laughed and Marcus smiled, a genuine, warm expression that his staff barely recognized anymore. The hard edges of his ambition had softened into something more human, more real. "I'd like that very much," Marcus said. "Lead the way." As they walked together through the halls of the hospital, past nurses and doctors who now worked as a united team, past patients receiving care from both cutting-edge technology and timeless human wisdom, past a system that had been broken and was slowly being rebuilt into something better, one thing became radiantly clear. True healing doesn't just happen in bodies, it happens in hearts, in pride that learns humility, in cruelty that transforms into compassion, in power that finally understands its greatest strength comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. Margaret Chen had saved more than Emma Hale's life that terrible night. She'd saved a man's soul. She'd saved a father-daughter relationship that was dying from neglect. She'd saved a hospital from becoming a soulless machine. And she'd saved herself from the bitterness that could have consumed her after such profound injustice. She'd done it not through revenge, but through grace. Not through anger, but through excellence. Not by demanding recognition, but by simply being who she'd always been. A healer who saw every life as precious, even the lives of people who'd treated her as worthless. That was her superpower. Not technology, not innovation, not efficiency. Humanity. A year after the incident, Riverside Hospital had become a model for healthcare institutions across the country. Delegations came from other hospitals to study their integration of experienced nursing staff with modern technology. Medical schools began restructuring their curricula to include more mentorship from veteran nurses. The Hale Foundation had expanded to 30 hospitals nationwide, funding positions for nurses over 50, and creating a pathway for experienced healthcare workers to share their knowledge instead of being forced into retirement. Margaret published a paper on pattern recognition in rare disease diagnosis that became required reading in nursing schools. She gave talks at conferences, always emphasizing the same message. Innovation and experience aren't enemies, they're partners. Emma turned 13, then 14. She maintained straight A's while volunteering at the hospital every weekend. She'd decided she wanted to become a doctor who specialized in tropical medicine, inspired by Margaret's stories of working in field hospitals. Marcus supported her dream completely, even when it meant she'd probably spend years in remote locations, far from luxury and comfort. The relationship between father and daughter had transformed entirely. They were close now, genuinely close. They talked about everything. Marcus knew her fears, her hopes, her struggles, her triumphs. He'd learned that being a father meant showing up consistently, listening more than talking, and valuing who Emma was over who he wanted her to be. On Emma's 14th birthday, she didn't want a big party. She wanted a small dinner with her dad, her mom, and Margaret. The four of them sat in a quiet restaurant, talking and laughing, a family knitted together not by blood or marriage, but by the bonds forged in crisis and strengthened through genuine care. "Make a wish," Catherine, Emma's mother, said as they brought out the birthday cake. Emma closed her eyes, thought for a moment, and blew out the candles. When her dad asked what she'd wished for, she smiled mysteriously. "I wished that everyone could have someone like Ms. Margaret in their life," she said simply. "Someone who sees them when everyone else looks through them. Someone who shows up when it's hard. Someone who proves that the best things about being human can't be programmed or bought." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. She reached across the table and squeezed Emma's hand. "The world has plenty of people like that, sweetheart," Margaret said softly. "They're the nurses working double shifts in understaffed hospitals. They're the teachers staying late to help struggling students. They're the social workers fighting for kids no one else will fight for. They're everywhere, doing extraordinary things that go unnoticed. I'm not special. I'm just one of millions of people who care." "No," Marcus said quietly, speaking up for the first time. "You're wrong, Margaret. You are special. Not because you care. You're right, lots of people care. You're special because you cared even when it cost you everything. When you had every reason to walk away, to let your anger win, to let my daughter die as some kind of cosmic justice for what I'd done to you. But you didn't. You showed up anyway. That's not common, that's extraordinary. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. You taught me that character isn't what you do when people are watching and grateful. It's what you do when people have wronged you, when helping them hurts you, when no one would blame you for walking away. That's when you discover who you really are. The table was quiet for a moment. So, Marcus continued, raising his glass, here's to Margaret Chen, who showed an arrogant fool that wisdom matters more than wealth, experience matters more than efficiency, and humanity matters more than everything else combined. Thank you for saving my daughter, and thank you for not giving up on her father. They clinked glasses, and Emma beamed at the three adults who'd shaped her life in such profound ways. Later that night, after the dinner ended and everyone went home, Marcus stood on his penthouse balcony looking out over the city. Emma was inside, finishing homework before bed. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about quarterly earnings or market share or the next big acquisition. He was thinking about how close he'd come to losing everything that actually mattered, how his pride and arrogance had nearly cost him his daughter, how a 62-year-old nurse he'd treated like garbage had proven to be the most important person in his life, even though he'd never even bothered to learn her name until it was almost too late. The enormousness of that reality still staggered him sometimes. Emma appeared at the balcony door. Dad, it's getting late, aren't you coming inside? Marcus turned and smiled at his daughter, really saw her the way he did now every single day. The purple streak she'd dyed in her hair, the marine biology textbook tucked under her arm, the confidence and kindness that had blossomed over the past year. Yeah, sweetheart, I'm coming. As he followed Emma inside, Marcus silently thanked a woman who'd taught him the most important lesson of his life. The people you dismiss today might be the only ones who can save you tomorrow. Treat everyone with dignity, value everyone's contribution, respect everyone's experience, because you never know when you'll need them most. The world will always try to tell you that newer is better, that faster is smarter, that youth is more valuable than experience, that efficiency matters more than empathy, that profit should trump compassion. But the truth is this: wisdom cannot be downloaded, intuition cannot be programmed, decades of experience cannot be replicated by any algorithm, and the value of a human being is never, ever measured by their age, their speed, or their profitability. It's measured by their capacity to care when caring is hard, to show up when showing up costs them something, to save lives not for recognition or reward, but because that's simply who they are, to forgive when forgiveness seems impossible, to teach when teaching means being vulnerable, to stand for what's right even when everyone else is sitting down. Margaret Chen taught Marcus Hale that lesson in the most painful way possible, and in doing so, she didn't just save one life. She transformed an entire hospital, rescued a broken father-daughter relationship, changed an industry's approach to valuing experience, and reminded everyone watching that some people don't become obsolete with age. They become irreplaceable. If this story moved you, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, leave a comment telling me about someone in your life who's been underestimated because of their age or experience. Someone whose wisdom the world tried to throw away. Someone who proved that experience matters more than algorithms ever will. Give them the recognition they deserve in the comments below. Let's flood this section with stories of the Margaret Chens in all of our lives. Second, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because every single week we bring you stories about justice, karma, transformation, and the beautiful moment when arrogance finally meets its match. These are the stories that remind us how to be better humans. Don't miss a single one. Third, share this video with someone who needs to remember that respect isn't bought. It's earned through character, compassion, courage, and showing up when showing up is hardest. Share it with a nurse who's feeling undervalued. Share it with a teacher who's been dismissed. Share it with anyone who's been made to feel that experience doesn't matter anymore. They need to hear this message. Remember, the people you dismiss today might be the only ones who can save you tomorrow. The experience you devalue today might be the wisdom that saves your life tomorrow. The nurse you fire today might be the hero you desperately need tomorrow. Treat everyone with dignity. Value everyone's contribution. Never confuse efficiency with excellence or innovation with wisdom. Margaret Chen spent 40 years saving lives in places most people will never see. facing dangers most people will never know, making sacrifices most people will never understand. And when a billionaire tried to throw her away like yesterday's technology, she showed him and all of us that the most advanced technology in the world will never replace a human being who truly cares. That's a lesson worth remembering. That's a lesson worth sharing. That's a lesson worth living. See you in the next story. Until then, find the Margaret Chen in your life and thank them while you still can, while they're still here, before you realize too late how much you needed them all along. Peace.